Everyone thinks they know what breathing is. You do it without thinking. You do it while sleeping. You do it while panicking, laughing, grieving, running, hiding, waiting. Breath feels so ordinary that it disappears into the background of life like gravity or time. But that familiarity is precisely why almost no one notices the anomaly hiding in plain sight. Breath is not just another bodily function. It does something no other system in your body can do. It obeys you and ignores you at the same time. It runs automatically. Yet, the moment you decide to intervene, it listens. That alone should make you uneasy, because nothing else in your biology works that way. Your heart does not wait for permission. Your liver does not care about your opinions. Your nervous system fires long before you form a thought about it. But breath sits at the boundary between what you control and what controls you. It is the only physiological function that belongs to both worlds, voluntary and involuntary, conscious and automatic, intentional and reflexive. That boundary is not decorative. In complex systems, boundaries are where leverage lives. Here is the part most people never hear. When you change your breath, you are not calming yourself down, you are not relaxing, you are not self-soothing, you are issuing a direct instruction into the architecture of your nervous system without going through thought. No interpretation, no story, no belief required. A signal is sent and the system responds, not symbolically, mechanically. This is why breathing works even when you don't believe in it. It works on skeptics, it works on children, it works on people who have never heard the word meditation. It works in emergencies, in trauma, in silence, because breath is not a technique layered on top of consciousness. It is a control channel built into it. Most of your life, your consciousness runs at a fixed sampling rate. You don't notice this because you've never experienced anything else for long enough to compare it. But perception is not continuous. It is assembled. Reality arrives in slices, frames, pulses. The brain predicts, fills in gaps, smooths transitions. That smoothing is what makes the world feel stable. It is also what hides detail, and breath plays a role in how fast those frames arrive. When breathing is shallow and fast, perception compresses, time feels narrow, thoughts stack on top of each other, the present moment collapses into urgency. When breathing slows, something subtle but unmistakable happens. Gaps appear, space opens. The same external world is there, but it feels less crowded, less urgent, less hostile. Not because the world changed, but because the interface through which you are receiving it did. This is not philosophy, it is physiology with consequences. Inside your brain is a literal pathway connecting the areas responsible for planning, thinking, and decision-making to the ancient structures that regulate survival. This pathway does not respond to logic. It responds to rhythm. When breath changes, this pathway activates. The thinking brain signals downward. The brainstem responds upward. A loop closes. The system stabilizes. Anxiety does not dissolve because you convinced yourself of anything. It dissolves because the system receives a different timing signal. Timing is everything in complex systems, not force, not effort, timing. This is why telling yourself to calm down rarely works. Words arrive too late. They pass through interpretation, memory, identity. Breath arrives underneath all of that. It speaks the language the nervous system was built to understand. Rhythm, pace, duration, silence, and this is where the mistake happens. We talk about breath as if it were air, as if oxygen were the point. Oxygen matters, but it is not the mechanism. Breath is a rhythmic event that propagates through multiple systems at once: neural, cardiac, chemical, electromagnetic. When you inhale, pressure changes ripple through the chest, the blood vessels, the vagus nerve, the brainstem. When you exhale, a different cascade follows. Every cycle resets oscillations across the system, not metaphorically, measurably. Think about that for a moment. Every breath you take is a system-wide reset pulse. and most of the time it happens without your involvement. Automatic, habitual, unexamined. You are constantly tuning the system, but you never touch the dial. When the system runs fast, perception narrows. When the system runs slow, perception widens, not spiritually, structurally. This is why people report that time seems to slow when they breathe deliberately. Time itself does not slow. The sampling rate changes. More information fits into the same second. The moment feels thicker, more detailed, more navigable. This is also why panic feels timeless and instant at the same time. The sampling rate spikes, frames blur. There is no space to reflect, only to react. What you call calm is not a feeling, it is a bandwidth state. Now here is where this becomes more than stress management. If breath regulates the sampling rate of consciousness, then it regulates what you can perceive, what you can notice, what patterns are available to you. And perception is not passive. Perception determines decision-making, memory encoding, emotional tone, and behavioral choice, which means breath is upstream of thought, downstream from it. This flips the entire self-help model on its head. You are not breathing because you are anxious. You are anxious because you are breathing a certain way. You are not calm because you understand something. You understand something because your system is calm enough to perceive it. Insight follows coherence. It does not create it. Most people try to change their lives by changing what they think. They ignore the mechanism that determines whether thinking is even clear enough to work. Breath does not give you answers. It removes distortion. And in systems theory, removing distortion often reveals solutions that were already present but inaccessible. This is why breath shows up everywhere. Human consciousness has been studied deeply, not as poetry, not as ritual, as instruction, the first instruction, the one given before philosophy, before doctrine, before explanation. Change the rhythm and the system reorganizes itself. And yet modern culture treats breath as background noise, something you do while waiting for something important to happen, something to be optimized only for athletic performance or relaxation. We miss the obvious implication because it feels too simple to matter, but simplicity is not weakness. In complex systems, the most powerful controls are often the least visible. Breath does not look like a lever, it looks like air moving in and out of flesh. But levers don't announce themselves, they hide in plain sight, quietly waiting to be pulled. Here is the uncomfortable truth. You have been tuning your consciousness your entire life without realizing it. Every shallow breath, every held breath, every unconscious sigh has been shaping the way reality appears to you. You didn't choose the default rhythm. It formed under stress, habit, culture, and survival. And once it formed, it became invisible. But invisibility does not mean irrelevance. It means influence without awareness. In the movements that follow, we are not going to talk about breath as a wellness tool. We are not going to dress it up as spirituality. We are going to look at what breath actually does to the observer, to perception, to coherence, and to the structure through which reality is rendered. Because once you understand that breath is not air, but interface, something irreversible happens. You stop trying to force change at the level of belief. You start adjusting the system that decides what is even possible to perceive. And that is where real leverage begins. To understand why breath has this kind of leverage, you have to look at the wiring, not metaphorically, literally, because buried beneath the poetry and the ancient language is a piece of anatomy so direct, so inelegant, that it almost feels embarrassing to talk about. A circuit, a pathway, a line of communication that runs from the newest part of your brain to one of the oldest. At the top sits the cortex, planning, language, identity, future, memory. The part of you that thinks it is in charge. At the bottom sits the brainstem, breathing, heart rate, blood pressure, survival reflexes. The part of you that actually keeps you alive when you are unconscious, distracted, or asleep. For most bodily functions, the cortex has no direct access to this lower system. It can suggest, it can narrate, but it cannot command. Breath is the exception. There is a descending pathway that allows intention to travel downward through breath. When you choose to inhale more slowly, more deeply, more deliberately, the signal does not get translated into language. It does not pass through belief. It does not wait for emotional agreement. It arrives as rhythm, and the brainstem understands rhythm perfectly. And this is why breath feels different from every other form of self-regulation. You are not persuading your nervous system, you are synchronizing with it. You are speaking its native language. When neuroscientists mapped this pathway, what stood out was not its complexity, but its efficiency. There is no cognitive detour, no narrative overlay. The cortex does not explain itself, it simply adjusts timing. And timing is everything. In the brainstem, timing determines whether the body prepares for threat or allows safety, whether muscles tense or release, whether attention narrows or widens. This is why breath works faster than thought. Thought arrives after the system has already chosen a state. Breath arrives before the state locks in. Most people assume anxiety is something that happens to them, a feeling that arises and must be managed. But anxiety is not a feeling first, it is a pattern, a rhythm, a tempo the nervous system has learned to maintain. Fast, shallow, irregular breathing feeds that tempo continuously, not intentionally, automatically. You are fueling the state you are trying to escape. Slow the breath, and the pattern destabilizes, not gradually, immediately. The brainstem recalibrates, the cascade begins, heart rate variability increases, blood pressure shifts, neural firing patterns reorganize, and the feeling you label as anxiety dissolves because the structure that supported it is no longer there. This is the part that is easy to miss. Breath does not remove anxiety. It removes the conditions that allow anxiety to persist. When the conditions change, the state cannot survive. There is something else happening along this pathway that is even more important. As breath slows, the brain's internal timing begins to change. Neural oscillations, the rhythmic electrical patterns that coordinate communication between brain regions, begin to align with the respiratory cycle. Inhale, exhale. Signal, pause. Signal, pause. The brain starts listening to the body as a clock. This is not calming in the emotional sense. It is organizing. Regions that normally fire out of sync begin to communicate more efficiently. Noise drops. Redundancy decreases. The system becomes more coherent, and coherence changes what information can move through the system. Think of it this way. A crowded room full of people all speaking at once contains the same information as a room where people speak one at a time. But in the first room, nothing can be heard. In the second, everything becomes available. Breath is what tells the room when to speak. This is why people report clarity when they breathe deliberately, not insight in the mystical sense, clarity in the structural sense, less interference, less overlap, less internal static. And here is the subtle but crucial shift. When the system becomes coherent, perception changes before interpretation does. You notice more before you think more. The edges of experience sharpen. The present moment feels wider, not because time changed, but because your access to it did. This is also why breath changes your relationship to time. Fast breath compresses experience. Slow breath expands it. You are not altering reality. You are altering resolution. Modern neuroscience calls this entrainment, the synchronization of rhythms across systems. Brain waves align with heart rhythms align with respiration. The entire organism begins to pulse together, not metaphorically, electrically, mechanically. This is measurable, predictable, repeatable, but entrainment has implications that go far beyond stress reduction. When systems entrain, they do not just share timing, they share state. Information moves more freely, feedback loops strengthen, the boundary between command and response blurs. The brain stops shouting orders at the body stops interrupting the brain with alarms. A dialogue emerges, and this is where something important happens to the observer. The observer you experience as you is not a static entity. It is a construct maintained by ongoing signals from the body to the brain and back again: heartbeat, breath, muscle tone, gut activity. All of these feed into a region of the brain responsible for generating the felt sense of being someone here. When those signals are chaotic, the sense of self becomes noisy, fragmented, anxious. When those signals synchronize, the sense of self stabilizes. This is not philosophical, it is anatomical. Breath changes the input changes the integration changes the experience of self, which means breath does not just change how you feel, it changes who is feeling. This is why long-term breath practitioners report a different relationship to their internal world. Not because they have better discipline or stronger beliefs, but because their interoceptive system, the system that senses the inner body, becomes more sensitive, more precise. They feel shifts before they escalate. They notice tension before it becomes emotion. They detect arousal before it becomes reaction. Most people live one step behind their nervous system. Breath brings you back into sync with it, and when you are in sync, the system stops overreacting. Not because you suppress it, because it no longer needs to shout to be heard. This is the quiet intelligence of the pathway. The cortex does not dominate the brainstem, it cooperates with it. Breath is the handshake, the agreement, the timing signal that says we are safe enough to coordinate. And once coordination begins, something else follows naturally. Attention stabilizes, memory encoding improves, emotional volatility decreases, decision-making becomes less reactive. None of this requires effort. Effort is the sign that the system is still fighting itself. Here is the deeper implication, and it is not mystical, it is architectural. If breath can reorganize the timing of neural communication, then it can change what patterns are possible in consciousness. Certain thoughts require noise to persist. Certain emotional loops require fragmentation. When coherence rises, those loops lose their footing. This is why breath feels like access, not to peace, to structure. Next, we're going to follow this idea further, because once you see breath as a timing mechanism, not a relaxation technique, the next question becomes unavoidable. If breath regulates the sampling rate of perception, then what else might it be tuning into? And what happens when the observer itself begins to stabilize, not emotionally, but structurally? That is where the implications begin to extend beyond the nervous system and into the architecture of experience itself. Once you see breath as a timing signal rather than a calming trick, something else clicks into place. Time begins to behave differently, not symbolically, experientially. People often say that slow breathing makes time feel like it's stretching, like moments have more space inside them. That description is accurate, but incomplete. Time is not stretching. Your access to it is. Consciousness does not experience reality as a continuous stream. It samples it, frame by frame, pulse by pulse. The feeling of continuity is an illusion created by prediction and memory filling in the gaps. This is efficient. It keeps you functional. It also hides detail. The faster the sampling rate, the more aggressively the brain compresses information. Less detail, less nuance, more urgency. Fast breathing accelerates that compression. The system prioritizes survival-relevant data and discards everything else. Subtlety disappears. Peripheral awareness collapses. The present moment becomes thin, sharp, and unforgiving. This is why panic feels immediate and timeless at the same time. There is no room between frames, no space to observe, only reaction. Slow breathing does the opposite. It increases temporal resolution. More information fits into the same second. You notice transitions instead of just outcomes. You sense the rise of a thought before it becomes language. You feel emotion forming before it becomes overwhelming. This is not mindfulness as a philosophy, it is perception with higher fidelity. Think about how a high frame rate camera changes motion. Nothing about the event itself changes, but suddenly you can see details that were always there. The ripple of muscle, the arc of movement, the pause between impact and release. Slow breathing does this to consciousness. It does not add anything new. It reveals what was previously skipped. This is why insight tends to arrive when the system is slow enough to notice relationships. Patterns require space. They do not reveal themselves under compression. When breathing decelerates, the brain's internal clocks slow with it. Neural oscillations stretch. The pauses between firing become just as important as the firing itself. And in those pauses, information integrates. This is where people get confused and call the experience mystical. It feels unfamiliar, not because it is supernatural, but because it is rare in modern life. Most people live at a perceptual frame rate, optimized for urgency, not understanding. Slow breathing drops you into a different mode of access. One where causality becomes visible. You start to notice that emotions do not appear fully formed, they assemble. You notice that thoughts are not continuous, they arise, peak, dissolve. You notice that attention has texture, weight, direction. None of this is new, it has always been happening. You are simply sampling too fast to see it. And this is where the relationship between breath and time becomes profound. Time, as you experience it, is not a property of the universe, it is a property of perception. Two people can sit in the same room for the same hour and experience radically different amounts of time. One feels rushed, the other feels spacious. The clock does not change, the interface does. Breath is one of the primary regulators of that interface. When respiration slows, the hippocampus, the brain structure involved in memory and temporal sequencing, begins to reorganize how events are stitched together. Memory encoding becomes richer. Events feel more distinct. This is why moments experienced in calm states feel longer in retrospect. Not because they lasted longer, but because they were encoded with more detail. Fast breathing does the opposite. Events blur together, memory fragments, time collapses into urgency. Later, you look back and wonder where it went. This has consequences far beyond stress. Decision-making depends on temporal resolution. When you cannot perceive the unfolding of a situation, you default to habits, reflexes, scripts. When time feels expanded, choice becomes possible. You see options because you can see sequence. Cause and effect stop collapsing into a single point. This is why slowing the breath often leads to a feeling of agency returning. Not because you gained control, but because you regained visibility. You can only choose what you can perceive. Here is the subtle shift that most people miss. When breath changes time perception, it also changes identity. The self you experience is constructed moment by moment through continuity. When continuity compresses, the self feels rigid, defensive, trapped. When continuity expands, the self feels fluid, adaptable, present. Not because your personality changed, but because the temporal scaffolding that supports it did. This is why people often say they feel more themselves when they slow down. What they mean is that the noise dropped enough for the signal to emerge. The narrator quieted, the observer stabilized. And this brings us to a crucial realization. The observer is not separate from time. The observer is built out of time, out of sequencing, out of rhythm. Change the rhythm, and the observer reorganizes itself. Breath does not give you more time, it gives you more resolution within time. That distinction matters because it means you are not escaping reality, you are inhabiting it more fully. This is also why breath-based practices appear across cultures as gateways rather than destinations. They are not meant to take you somewhere else. They are meant to change how you arrive here. When the sampling rate shifts, the present moment becomes inhabitable instead of overwhelming. Modern life trains the opposite. Speed, compression, multitasking, constant input. We live in a perpetual state of perceptual acceleration, and then we wonder why time feels scarce, why attention fractures, why meaning feels thin. The system is not broken, it is running exactly as it has been trained to run. Breath is how you interrupt that training, not with force, with rhythm. And here is the deeper implication that begins to emerge. If breath regulates the resolution of perception, and perception determines what patterns can be detected, then breath indirectly shapes the reality you experience. Not by altering the external world, but by altering which aspects of it become available to you. This is not manifestation, it is access. The world is dense with information. Most of it never reaches awareness. Your nervous system filters aggressively to keep you functional. Breath is one of the levers that adjusts that filter. Slow it down and more of reality gets through. Speed it up and reality simplifies. Neither is good or bad. They are modes: survival mode, exploration mode, reaction mode, observation mode. Breath is what switches between them. Once timing aligns within the brain, something else starts to happen. The boundary between systems begins to soften. Brain and heart, heart and body, body and environment. Not metaphorically, but through measurable synchronization. And when synchronization occurs, the observer stops feeling isolated. That is where coherence begins to matter. Once timing shifts inside the brain, the effects do not stay local, they propagate. Breath does not reorganize one system at a time. It reorganizes relationships between systems. This is where the idea of coherence becomes essential, and also where it is most misunderstood. Coherence is not relaxation. It is not serenity. It is not the absence of intensity. Coherence is alignment across complexity. In a coherent system, parts are not quiet. They are synchronized. Signals arrive when they are needed. Feedback loops strengthen instead of competing. Noise drops not because activity stops, but because activity becomes coordinated. This is what breath initiates when it slows deliberately. It provides a shared rhythm that disparate systems can lock onto. The brain does not operate as a single unit. It is a federation of networks, each with its own timing, priorities, and biases. Under stress, these networks fall out of sync. Emotional circuits fire ahead of cognitive ones. Memory intrudes where attention should be. The body sends alarm signals faster than the brain can contextualize them. This is fragmentation. Most people experience it as overwhelm. When breath slows, something remarkable happens. Neural oscillations across distant regions begin to phase lock. Electrical activity that was previously chaotic starts to pulse together. Communication improves, not because the signals are stronger, but because they arrive at the right time. The system begins to behave like an orchestra finding a shared tempo. At the same time, the heart enters the conversation. Heart rate variability increases, which is not a sign of weakness or instability, but of adaptability. A rigid heart rhythm is a stressed heart. A variable rhythm is a responsive one. As breath lengthens, the heart begins to entrain to it, accelerating slightly on the inhale, decelerating on the exhale. This rhythm is then fed back to the brain through afferent pathways. The heart informs the brain of the body's state. The brain adjusts its predictions accordingly. This is not a hierarchy, it is a dialogue. Most people live in a state where the brain talks and the body interrupts. Breath changes that relationship. It allows the body to speak clearly and the brain to listen. When that happens, decision-making shifts. Attention stabilizes, emotional responses become proportional instead of explosive. Here is the key insight. Coherence does not eliminate emotion. It contextualizes it. Fear still arises, excitement still arises, sadness still arises, but they do not hijack the system, they inform it. The difference is profound. This is why people often report feeling more present during coherent breathing. Presence is not a feeling, it is a state of coordination. When signals align, the system can afford to be here. When they do not, it must constantly scan for threat. Coherence also changes how information moves through memory networks. In a fragmented state, memory retrieval is biased toward threat and relevance. Past failures surface easily. Regret intrudes. Anticipatory anxiety fills the gaps. When coherence increases, memory becomes more associative and less defensive. Connections emerge. Context returns. The past stops shouting. This is not because the content of memory changed. The access pattern did. And this brings us to something subtle but transformative. When coherence increases, the sense of separation softens, not philosophically, perceptually. The boundary between inner and outer becomes less rigid. You feel less like a point under siege and more like a system in exchange. This is why coherence often carries a quiet sense of meaning, not meaning imposed from above, but meaning emerging from relationship. When systems communicate cleanly, significance appears naturally. You do not have to invent it. The scientific term for this is coupling. Systems that are coupled share information efficiently. Their states influence each other. Breath strengthens coupling between brain and heart and body, body and environment. Not metaphorically, through measurable feedback loops. This is also why coherence cannot be forced. You cannot think your way into alignment. Thought is downstream. Rhythm is upstream. Breath is rhythm made accessible. Now consider the implication. If coherence aligns internal systems, and if perception depends on those systems, then coherence alters how reality is rendered. Not by changing what exists, but by changing what is integrated into experience. Fragmented systems render fragmented worlds. Coherent systems render relational ones. This is where the idea of the observer begins to shift. The observer you experience is not separate from the systems that sustain it. It is an emergent property of their coordination. When coordination improves, the observer stabilizes. When coordination collapses, the observer fractures. This is why breath-based coherence often feels like coming home, not to a belief, but to a baseline. A state where effort drops because effort is no longer needed to hold the system together. Modern neuroscience increasingly acknowledges this, even if the language remains cautious. Studies show that during coherent breathing, gamma band activity in the cortex begins to correlate with heart rhythms. The brain predicts the heart predicts the brain. This mutual prediction creates stability. The system stops fighting itself. Think about what that means. The brain is no longer acting as a detached controller. It becomes a participant. The body is no longer a passive vehicle. It becomes a source of information. The observer is no longer perched above the system. It is embedded within it. This embeddedness changes everything. When the observer is embedded, experience feels participatory rather than adversarial. You are no longer reacting to life as something that happens to you. You are interacting with it as something you are part of. This is not a belief shift. It is a perceptual one. Coherence also reduces the need for narrative. When systems align, less explanation is required. You do not need to constantly tell yourself what is happening because you can feel it directly. This is why inner dialogue often quiets during coherent states, not because thoughts are suppressed, but because they are no longer needed to mediate experience. This quiet is often mistaken for emptiness. It is not empty, it is integrated. And here is where the conversation deepens. If coherence aligns internal systems, and if those systems are continuously interacting, with the environment through sensory input, electromagnetic fields, and physiological exchange, then coherence does not stop at the skin. The boundary becomes more permeable, not mystically, functionally. Systems that are coherent are more sensitive. They detect subtler signals. They respond with greater precision. They require less force to adapt. This is true in physics, biology, and engineering. There is no reason it would not be true in consciousness. Breath, by imposing rhythm on noise, creates the conditions for this sensitivity. It does not add power, it removes interference. Once coherence stabilizes the observer, then the question is, if consciousness is not merely generated but filtered, then what is it filtering? And what happens when the filter becomes unusually clear? At this point, a quiet tension appears in the conversation. Not because the science breaks, but because its implications begin to stretch beyond what modern language is comfortable naming. Up until now, everything fits neatly inside established frameworks. Neural timing, coherence, system alignment, perceptual resolution. But when you follow those threads far enough, they converge on a question that cannot be avoided. What exactly is the observer? For most of modern history, we have assumed the answer was obvious. Consciousness is something the brain produces. Neurons fire, networks interact, complexity crosses a threshold, and awareness emerges. This model has been useful. It explains behavior, it predicts damage, it allows for intervention. But usefulness is not the same as completeness, because there is a growing discomfort in neuroscience, one that rarely makes it into headlines. We can correlate brain activity with experience. We can disrupt experience by disrupting the brain. But correlation is not origin, and disruption is not explanation. We still do not know why electrical activity feels like anything at all. This is where the receiver model quietly re-enters the conversation, not as belief, as hypothesis. The receiver model does not deny the role of the brain, it reframes it. Instead of generating consciousness, the brain filters it, shapes it, limits it, renders a local functional version of something broader, just as a radio does not create music but selects a frequency and converts it into sound. For decades, this idea was dismissed as philosophical speculation, too vague, too untestable, too close to metaphysics. But something interesting has happened in recent years. The data has begun to outline how such a model could be possible, even if it does not yet prove that it is true. Breath becomes relevant here again because breath does something no other intervention does so cleanly. It alters the filter without altering the hardware. It changes the tuning of the system without adding content. When you change your breathing rhythm, you are not introducing new information into the brain. You are changing how existing information is processed, integrated, and prioritized. You are adjusting gain, timing, sensitivity. The same world is there, the same sensory input, and yet experience changes dramatically. This should give us pause. If consciousness were purely generated, changing the rate of gas exchange should not meaningfully alter perception beyond arousal. And yet it does, not just emotionally, structurally. People report shifts in self-boundaries, altered sense of time, changes in meaning, insight that feels non-linear, as if perceived rather than reasoned. Again, these reports do not prove anything on their own. Subjective experience is slippery. But when subjective reports align with objective changes in neural coherence, timing, and integration, they become harder to dismiss. Now consider this. The observer you experience as you is constructed continuously from incoming signals, body state, memory, sensory input, prediction, feedback. When these signals are noisy, the observer feels fragmented. When they synchronize, the observer stabilizes. But nowhere in this process do we locate a central generator. There is no single place where awareness turns on. There is only coordination. This is why the receiver model is compelling. It explains why consciousness disappears under anesthesia, not because it is destroyed, but because the system loses coherence. The filter collapses. The signal cannot be rendered locally. When coherence returns, experience returns. Not gradually, instantly. Breath interacts with this in a precise way. By altering coherence and timing, it changes the conditions under which experience can be rendered. It does not create awareness. It modulates access. This reframing matters because it removes the need for exaggerated claims. Breath does not open portals. It does not summon entities. It does not grant special powers. It simply adjusts the interface. And when the interface changes, what passes through changes with it. This also explains why different breathing patterns produce different experiential effects. Slow, coherent breathing stabilizes the observer. Rapid, rhythmic breathing destabilizes it. In both cases, the hardware remains the same. Only the tuning changes. When the observer destabilizes, boundaries loosen. The sense of me becomes less rigid. Memories surface differently. Associations form across domains that normally remain separate. People describe this as expansive, overwhelming, or revelatory, depending on context and preparation, but at a structural level, it is simply a filter operating outside its habitual range. The important distinction is this: these experiences are not created by breath, they are revealed by changes in filtering. This is why the most responsible researchers remain careful. They do not claim that consciousness is non-local. They say that the brain behaves in ways consistent with a filtering model. They say that coherence allows access to states that are normally unavailable. They say that timing matters more than content. Breath is central to this because timing is its primary currency. Every inhale slightly increases cortical excitability. Every exhale slightly decreases it. Over time, these micro shifts entrain larger rhythms. The system begins to oscillate differently. And oscillation is how information moves in complex networks. Now ask yourself this: if consciousness were purely local, why would oscillatory coherence matter so much? Why would timing across distant regions be so critical to experience? Why would altering rhythm without adding information change perception so profoundly? The receiver model does not answer these questions definitively, but it gives them a place to live. And here is where Codex of Light draws a clear line. We do not need to leap into speculation about quantum fields or hidden dimensions to take this seriously. We only need to acknowledge that the observer is not a thing. It is a process, and processes are sensitive to timing, coherence, and alignment. Breath is one of the few levers we have that can influence all three at once. This is why breath shows up wherever humans have explored consciousness deeply. Not because it is mystical, because it works. It reliably alters the interface. It reliably changes the observer. And when the observer changes, the world that appears changes with it. Not because reality itself has shifted, but because the slice of reality you are capable of rendering has. So let's look at the following question. If consciousness is filtered rather than generated, and if breath tunes the filter, then what exactly is being filtered? And why does coherence sometimes feel like connection rather than isolation? When you follow this far enough, the conversation stops being about breath and starts being about orientation. Not where you go, but how you are positioned within experience itself. This is where modern science slows its language and ancient systems become strangely precise. Not because they knew more facts, but because they were paying attention to structure. Across cultures that never met, never exchanged texts, never shared methods, the same discovery appears again and again. Before doctrine, before philosophy, before cosmology, breath, not as symbolism, but as instruction. Adjust the rhythm and the mind reorganizes. Adjust the rhythm long enough and the sense of self shifts, not upward, inward. into coherence. The Egyptians spoke of breath as the animating principle that made the body receptive to consciousness. The Greeks understood breath not as air, but as the carrier of intelligence through the body. In Sanskrit, breath was never separated from awareness. It was the movement through which awareness expressed itself. In each case, the language differs, but the function is identical. Breath was treated as interface. What is striking is not the spirituality of these traditions, but their restraint. They did not promise escape from the world. They did not frame breath as transcendence. They framed it as return to alignment, return to clarity, return to a mode of perception that precedes fragmentation. Modern neuroscience is arriving at the same conclusion from the opposite direction, not through myth, but through measurement. When respiratory rhythm stabilizes, neural systems synchronize. When systems synchronize, perception clarifies. When perception clarifies, the observer feels less isolated, not because they are connected to something new, but because the noise that created separation has dropped. This is the crucial distinction. Breath does not add anything to consciousness, it removes interference. And interference is what modern life generates relentlessly: speed without rhythm, information without integration, stimulation without recovery. The nervous system adapts by fragmenting. It narrows perception, it compresses time, it builds a rigid observer to survive complexity. This observer is efficient, but it is brittle. It feels alone, it feels under pressure, it feels separate. Breath is how that rigidity softens, not by dissolving identity, but by stabilizing it, not by escaping reality, but by inhabiting it more fully. When rhythm returns, coherence follows. When coherence follows, the observer stops bracing against experience and begins participating in it. This is why people often describe coherent states as quietly profound rather than dramatic. There are no fireworks, no visions required, just a sense that things are where they should be, that effort drops, that perception widens, that time has texture again. This is also why breath-based work can feel unsettling at first. When interference drops, what remains becomes visible. Sensations intensify, emotions surface earlier, thoughts slow enough to be noticed. This is not danger, it is honesty. The system is no longer outrunning itself. And here is the final turn of the spiral. If consciousness is not isolated inside the skull but embedded in a larger field of information, then coherence does not feel like expansion because you are leaving the body. It feels like expansion because the boundaries that were artificially rigid soften. The observer stops feeling like a point and starts feeling like a process. This is not something you believe into being. It is something you stabilize into. Breath is how you stabilize it, not through control, through rhythm, through timing, through repetition. Each inhale sets the system. Each exhale releases excess noise. Over time, the nervous system learns a new baseline, one that does not require constant defense, one that can afford to be receptive. This is the quiet power of breath. It does not change the world. It changes how the world arrives. It does not give you meaning. It clears the space where meaning emerges naturally. It does not make you spiritual, it makes you coherent. And coherence has consequences. When perception stabilizes, patterns become visible. When patterns become visible, choice returns. When choice returns, life stops feeling like something that happens to you and starts feeling like something you are in dialogue with. This is not control, it is participation. The ancient traditions understood this without needing machines or oscillation graphs. Modern science is rediscovering it without needing myth. They are approaching the same structure from different angles, and the structure does not change. Breath is the lever, rhythm is the language, coherence is the result. So the invitation is not to breathe in order to escape yourself. It is to breathe in order to meet yourself more clearly To meet the observer, not as a story, not as a belief, but as a living interface that can be tuned. You have been tuning it unconsciously your entire life. Every rushed breath, trained urgency. Every held breath, trained tension. Every shallow breath, trained separation. Now you know there is another option, not a practice to add, a rhythm to remember, because breath was never meant to be background noise. It was meant to be access to clarity, access to coherence, access to a way of perceiving that feels less like surviving and more like inhabiting. You are not inside the world arrives through you. And breath is the interface that decides how